In order to reduce competition for limited resources, organisms living within communities occupy a specific ecological niche to lessen the overlap with other organisms for space, food, water, light, etc. But what about us? Humans also have to compete with other humans as well as with other species within our communities for those same resources. In order to sustain ourselves, we have encroached upon many other species' niches by destroying their habitats along with their food and water sources. How long can we continue this destructive process without causing a complete collapse of the Earth's resources? Recall that a community involves all interacting populations of different species that coexist within an area. These populations interact via competition, predation, and mutualism. While competition and predation are harmful to one or more of the populations, mutualism involves beneficial interactions between different populations. These community interactions maintain a balance between resources and the number of individuals consuming them. For example, predation and competition limit population sizes. This table shows the effect of different types of interactions among members of two species identified as self versus opponent. The relationships vary from being harmful to both species, beneficial to only one of the two species, or beneficial to both species. I have put a box around the four types of relationships that we have previously discussed. Competition harms both species by decreasing the resources available to both of them. As mentioned on the previous slide, mutualism involves a relationship that benefits both species involved. Parasitism, discussed in the previous presentation, benefits the parasite but harms the host. Predation benefits the predator eating the prey but clearly harms the prey being eaten. Coevolution refers to the fact that interacting species influence one another's evolution by acting as mutual agents of natural selection. For example, only members of a prey population that can escape predators will survive. If an organism can survive, it can reproduce, and when it reproduces, it passes along the genes needed for predator escape to its offspring. For example, let's consider a gene that allows an antelope to run more quickly. Whether this leads to longer legs or more muscle mass, an antelope that can outrun a lion on the African savanna can survive. And once again, if it survives being eaten by the lion, it can reproduce and will pass down its genes to its offspring. Therefore, its offspring will also be able to survive and continue passing down these survival genes to its own offspring. During competition, an organism uses or defends a resource, making it unavailable for another organism. Organisms compete within their own species and with other species during the competition process. As discussed in the previous presentation, intraspecific competition refers to organisms competing within the same species. Interspecific competition refers to organisms competing for resources between different species. This interspecific competition reduces the amount of resources available for both species, thereby indirectly harming both of them. Ecological niche refers to the unique role of a particular species within an ecosystem, including all aspects of its interaction with the living and non-living environments. Every species fulfills a unique niche to decrease competition for the same resources, as discussed on the previous slide. There are several factors that define a species niche. These include the amount of space it requires, its ideal survival temperature, the type of shelter it needs, the type and amount of nutrients it needs to consume to sustain itself, the amount of water it requires, the amount of light required to grow in the case of plants, what natural predators feed upon it, and the time of day that it's active. For instance, two species could utilize the same space to sleep, such as a cave or a hole in a tree, as long as one of the species is active during the day and the other is active at night. This leads to the competitive exclusion principle that states that while species may share some aspects of their niches, no two species may occupy the same exact ecological niche. For example, no two organisms can occupy the exact same physical space at once. For instance, if you are sitting on a chair, another person cannot sit on that same chair. They either will have to sit on your lap or they may be able to squeeze on the chair next to you, but this means that they are not technically occupying the same physical space, but rather a space next to you on the chair. Another example would be the hundreds of species of bacteria in the human body. The same human body can support all of these species of bacteria because they occupy different spaces, such as our skin, mouth, or intestines, and they also feed on different nutrients. Another aspect of the competitive exclusion principle is as follows. If two species do try to compete for all of the same exact resources, one of the two species often dies because it is outcompeted by the second species. For example, if two species of bacteria are grown in the same flask, one of the species often ends up dying because it is outcompeted by the other species for the same space and food source. Here we see the competitive exclusion principle illustrated in three different species of paramecium. Paramecium are single-celled water-dwelling organisms, and while three different species can grow with no problem in separate flasks, when grown in the same flask together, one of the two species is able to outcompete the second species so that the second species dies off. Competition between two species for the same space can limit their distribution and therefore the sizes of the populations. For example, different barnacles that live on rocks and feed on particles filtered from water in the intertidal zone have to stay within certain regions because they are competing for space with other barnacles on the same rock. Barnacles are an example of a marine crustacean, which refers to an aquatic creature with an external shell. Other examples of crustaceans include crab, lobster, and shrimp. The intertidal zone is the shore area that is alternately covered by the tide. In this case, competition from the blue barnacle species prevents members of the brown barnacle species from living outside a particular portion of the intertidal zone. We see that the brown barnacle species could technically occupy the entire side of the rock from top to bottom. This is referred to as its fundamental niche, which refers to the area that the barnacle could live in. However, due to competition from the blue species of barnacle, the brown species is only able to occupy the top portion of the, which becomes its realized niche, or the area in which it actually lives. When two species with overlapping niches coexist, they evolve physical and behavioral characteristics that reduce their competitive interactions. This is known as resource partitioning. When two species with similar requirements coexist, they each occupy a smaller niche than either would if it were by itself. We just saw an example of resource partitioning on the previous slide with two different species of barnacles. Another example that we'll see on the next slide is that 5 species of North American warbler birds build nests and search for insects within different regions of the same spruce evergreen trees. Each of these 5 species of North American warblers builds nests and searches for insects in a different region of spruce trees, highlighted in dark green. For instance, we see that the Cape May warbler occupies the region of the tree towards the top on the right-hand side, while the Blackburnian warbler occupies the top portion of the tree on the left-hand side. If there were only one species of warbler, it could occupy the entire tree. However, resource partitioning results in smaller niches so that all 5 species can coexist and survive off of the same type of tree.